Today I wanted to talk about different perennials, of which ones to cut back in the fall and which ones to leave. Now the main two things of reasons why you would cut it back is, one is because of bad bugs or insects that would harbor in there, and two, any diseases. Those are the main reasons to cut back. The third one is if it is going to drive you crazy and there's too much excess growth. For the catmint, you can totally leave it for the spring cutting if you want. But right here, this is gonna drive me nuts. This is already dead and just excess growth. So what I'm gonna do is kind of like go around and leave like a ponytail amount there and just cut off the sides of it. So I just grab this stuff that's excess here and just go around and start cutting with my bypass pruners. Again, it's not necessary, but it just kind of cleans it up. Otherwise, in the wintertime, I'm gonna be staring at this and I'm just gonna go crazy. So this is just a personal preference when it comes to catmint. But it looks so much better just a little bit cleaned up, a little bit off the top, and then it's done. Maybe if this is getting a little leggy, I take the leggy stuff off, but I leave everything else in until the spring, and then in the spring I reevaluate what needs to be cut. But that's all you got to do for catmint. For butterfly bush, I leave it until the spring, so do not cut back in the fall. The next plant that I want to talk about is black-eyed Susans or Rudbeckia. Now I have a lot of them, so I do leave some for the birds because they like the seed heads, and it does add some winter interest. But because this is by my house and I do have a lot of areas, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna cut these down and back, and I cut them all the way down to the ground. Now I'm only cutting the stems down to the ground. I'm not cutting the leaves. I'm leaving the leaves as they are, and then just taking them. Now this is more of a do as I say, don't do as I do. You want to wear gloves when you do this. My mom is constantly telling me to wear gloves in the garden, and she sends me gloves, and I try to remember, but sometimes I just forget. These have little hair-like structures on them that are a little prickly. So if you do wear gloves, like my mother says, and she's filming right now, that they will not hurt as much. Now, if you have the tiny hedge trimmers that are about 6 inches long that I've had in other videos, this is something that you can totally use like with this to save your hands from cutting. But bypass pruners like the ones that I have right now are totally fine to use too. And so that's what you can do for black-eyed Susans. You can either leave it for the birds and the birds can enjoy the seeds, or you can go ahead and clean it up if that's going to bother you and cut off that. Or if you have so many and they do scatter their seeds everywhere because the birds are taking the seeds and scattering them, you are going to get them quite often everywhere in that particular garden. So I like to cut some of them off so then I'm not pulling out black-eyed Susans. Again, I have too many right now. If you want more, then leave that, and then you can have more black-eyed Susans in the springtime. Rosemary, I leave for the fall. I don't cut it back until spring. Bluebeard, I cut back in the spring and not the fall. Coral bells, I wait until the spring to cut back. Do not cut them back in the fall. They are semi-evergreen. Dianthus, you want to cut back in the spring. For lavender, I like to wait until the spring to cut it. Some people say you can cut it in the winter, but if you cut into it and we get a really bad winter, it can do a lot of damage and you can lose some of your lavender. So I like to just wait and play it a little safer because we're in a zone 6 and sometimes we can have some really bad winters, and just wait until spring. For ornamental grasses, make sure that you cut them in the spring and not the fall. A lot of landscaping crews love to cut them early, and if we have a bad winter, the crown's exposed and they could die, so wait until the spring to cut them down. Let's talk about hostas. Hostas start looking bad right around now, and this is the time that you can go ahead and cut them back. Slugs love to lay eggs in there, so you want to go ahead and prevent that and go ahead and get rid of the foliage now. Phlox is also prone to powdery mildew, so what you want to do is you want to go ahead and cut your phlox down to the ground like this to avoid any powdery mildew. And what you can also do is go ahead and clean your bypass pruners after you cut them down, so you won't spread it to any of your other plants after cutting the phlox down. Sedums can add a lot of winter interest, so I would not cut those down yet and leave them. They are gorgeous when the snow lands on top right here where the flowers were. So leave those for the spring. Tall verbena, I do cut most of it off because it can get invasive very quickly in one garden bed. So I pull about 80% of it out and just cut it straight down to the ground. And I leave the rest for the birds and for it to self-seed. Bee balm is prone to powdery mildew, so what I do is I cut it down almost to the ground, leaving about an inch or so, because I want to get rid of all of this powdery mildew, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clean my bypass pruners before I prune anything else. For beautyberry, you want to wait until the spring to cut it and not the fall, and you're just going to go 12 inches above the ground and cut it. For coneflowers, you want to leave them on the plant for food for the birds and just wait until the spring to cut the heads off. Let's talk about mophead or big leaf hydrangeas. They do not like to be cut in the spring or fall. You really want to go ahead and just let them do their thing and leave them be. If you do want to cut the flower, only cut it down to 1 or 2 nodes below, because otherwise you're cutting off the flowers from the next bloom cycle. So big leaf hydrangeas, again, that's only one type of hydrangea. Don't cut them. False indigo or baptisia, you want to leave for winter interest, and you can cut it down in the springtime right before the new growth starts emerging. Oak leaf hydrangeas, they hate to be pruned. They don't like to be pruned in the fall, and they don't like to be pruned in the spring. If you want to cut the flower heads off, you can, but they like nobody to bother them and just let them do their thing. Now for yarrow, it's pretty easy. You're gonna go a couple inches above the ground and just cut it off in the fall, and then it'll be something that you don't have to worry about in the spring. Let's talk about chrysanthemums. Now, if it has a tag that says it's a hardy mum, those are more apt to make it through the winter, but you need to plant them in the ground and not the pot. The pot, it gets a lot cooler and it doesn't have the insulation and the heat of the ground. And so the best form of keeping your mums or your chrysanthemums and overwintering them is to plant them as early as possible in the fall so their root systems can get really good and established. Do not cut them down even if they look ugly, and put a little bit more mulch to help it keep it nice and warm around it, and then wait until the springtime, and if you see new growth emerging, then you know it's made it. But a lot of mums, they don't say hardy mums on them, and they will not make it through the winter. So pay attention to that tag, but don't cut it in the fall, cut it in the spring. For garlic chives, what I like to do is go ahead and do a hard prune on these, and a lot of them, only because they will self-seed a lot. I already have a lot. If you want more, you can leave the seed pods, and they look really pretty in the winter, but for most of the amount that I have, 80% of them, I just cut them back, and they are fine. Perennial is the peony bush. Now is the time that you will probably see it starting to crisp up like this, and that this is covered with powdery mildew. This is just kind of what happens in Cincinnati with the humidity. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna cut it about an inch above the soil line. And we're just gonna make cuts. And the reason why I leave an inch is because then I know, because sometimes I forget where I plant things, that the peonies are there. Now, because this had powdery mildew in, I'm going to then take my garden pruners, and if you have a puppy like me, I have to put a lid on it so that way she doesn't drink this. This is 10% bleach, 90% water. And what I do with my garden pruners is I put them in there and I want to sterilize it, because if I go ahead and I start doing more pruning, when I've already touched powdery mildew, I'm going to contaminate the next plant that I am cutting, and it's going to spread. And that's not what we want. Now, you can compost a lot of things, but if something has powdery mildew on it, you do not want to compost it. You want to put it directly in the trash. Okay. This is a hardy hibiscus. It's almost done flowering for the year. And this is one that I do not cut in the fall. I leave this here. Now, in the end of spring is when the new growth emerges. So you could do, before it emerges at the end of spring, that's when I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna use my loppers, because this stuff is pretty thick if you have an older one, and cut it all the way down to the base, and then it will send out new growth, and then you're done. But don't cut this. Okay, for crepe myrtle, I do not cut it in the fall. I leave it as it is, and I wait until the springtime, and it's usually later spring, early summer that it starts emerging. A lot of people think that it's died and then dig it up, when they don't know that it takes a little longer, like hardy hibiscus, to come up. So wait for it to emerge, wait for the green to come, and then just cut off any dead and leave the rest of the green that comes out. Now, some irises are reblooming, and they bloom in the springtime and the fall. And I have now only bought reblooming irises, because why have one bloom when you can have 2 blooming seasons? This is a reblooming type of iris. I absolutely love it, but for regular irises and reblooming irises, they are prone to disease. So this is one that you will want to cut in the fall. You're gonna go ahead and take the seed heads that have already bloomed. These 2 are still going to bloom, so I'm going to leave those until they do. But this one has already the seed pods on. I'm going to cut this back all the way back to the end like that, and take out all this heavy weight. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it in the shape of a fan and get a lot of this leaf off of it. And I'm just going to do this with my bypass pruners. It's really easy to do, but again, we're cutting this to eliminate a lot of disease. And you can also kind of have in mind too, if they're overcrowded, irises need their rhizome that is showing. They need their rhizome showing to make flowers. Some people have contacted me and asked why they are having trouble with that, and I ask if their landscaper or they themselves have put mulch and covered the rhizome. That's going to inhibit the flower growth. And a lot of people, as the foliage is kind of nice, they really grow irises for the blooms. So I'm also going to take and pull. If it's already like this color, this is really easy to pull. So I just pull those out with my hands, and then again, kind of do a fan shape like this and cut it in the foliage off.